The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
Good.
Wolves Wired podcast. We have no Wolves news except for one thing, but we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the playoffs. We have Dane Moore and Tom Schreier here, and is it on the phone or on Skype? I heard the Skype tone, but
he called a number to call into our
on
Skype.
Skype. David Naylor's here. Hi, David.
Yeah, I'm in Iowa, but I'm here. I'm both.
How's Iowa?
It's hot.
So, let's start by talking about the Wolves. We're just going to jump right in. Not a ton of news, but Karl-Anthony Towns and Jimmy Butler made the All-NBA third team, both of them, and I think a lot of people expected Jimmy to make it. Cat was a little bit more of a question mark, but they're both on the team. Dane Moore, you wrote an article about financial implications off them making the team. You want to talk about that?
Sure. I just thought it was cool to start to have two players who make the All-NBA team. I mean, I know it's not exactly a measuring stick of the top 15 players in the league, but if it's close, that's a pretty meaningful example. Last season, only the Warriors had teammates on the All-NBA team. This year, they had the two Thunder guys, you had the two Warriors guys, and you had the two Timberwolves players. So, of course, that's what we've known all along. Is this is a team that's definitely top heavy that needs to insulate the bench a little bit. But we do know that these guys are great. What is the kind of inherent sadness that lives around this is that it ups the potential for Karl-Anthony Towns' contract negotiations this summer for his extension. And so that number, if he doesn't, he can now negotiate a contract up to $188 million rather than $156 million over 5 years. He will need to make an All-NBA team again next year or win the MVP or win Defensive Player of the Year. We give him whatever he wants if he does that.
When he wins Defensive Player of the Year.
Yes, exactly.
He gets the Joe Smith deal if he gets Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah. But yeah, so he can sign a contract for 5 years, $188 million, and then also Butler wasn't impacted at all by making the All-NBA team. Even though it was the second straight year.
I bet he felt good about it.
Yeah. I guess financially impacted. What is interesting, though, is had he stayed in Chicago and made the All-NBA team this season, he would be next year he'd be up for that Supermax, which would be 5 years, $219 million, which is different than what he'll be able to receive from the Wolves is the $188 like Towns is.
But you had kind of written this there in your article. A 3-year deal makes a lot of sense for him.
Yeah, and so I guess that's what I was kind of thinking for you guys. If there seems to be a bit of a range of what can happen with Butler. What do you see him holding out for that full 188? David, do you want to take it first?
It's good. Yeah, it's such an interesting question. The Timberwolves can offer Jimmy more than any other team, or is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that there's a certain factor for that I think is going to play into Jimmy's reasoning that he can get the most money from the Timberwolves no matter what. So I think he's going to negotiate hard and he's going to have the opportunity to look at other teams. But if the Wolves are willing to offer him the most money, I think that 3-year deal makes the most sense for the Wolves. Mm-hmm. But I think it depends on a lot on how healthy he is this season, as far as if he's going to be able to realistically get that. Because, he played, 61 games this season? And if he's, again, just got nothing major, but just stuff coming up, little nagging injuries to make you miss 5 games here, 10 games here. If you're only getting the amazing player that Jimmy Butler is for 60 games a year instead of 80 games a year, that kind of lowers the desirability, especially with him aging. So I think that, his health this year is going to be a pretty big determining factor in what we see going forward in terms of those negotiations, both with the Wolves and with any other teams that get involved.
I think it's going to be hard to convince Butler's agent not to go for more years. I think even if Jimmy thinks that he's got lots of years left of being this elite player, his agent has to be looking at it like, all right, at the end of 3 years, how much money is he realistically going to be negotiating for? Is it max level money or near max level money? I doubt it. So, I mean, if I'm Butler's agent, I'm going for as many years as possible.
Right, and it kind of just becomes a leverage battle, and at some point, the Wolves can say, we'll pay you as much as any other team can offer you, but we're not going to give you that extra 20, 30 million bump. And the Wolves are very financially motivated to do so. And I mean, we have lots of examples of this in all sports. So it's not necessarily disrespectful or anything like that, but okay, put it like this: if the Wolves didn't have Andrew Wiggins signed to this deal, then I think the Wolves go to the negotiation table and say, "Yeah, well, Jimmy Butler, come on, be our max player." But in this situation they have now, the Wolves can be like, "Hey, Jimmy, we love you. We think you're a max guy, but if we're gonna be bringing you back here we just signed Towns and Wiggins to these massive extensions." If we're going to bring you back in here, we need it. Every dollar less that you can sign for is going to give us a little bit more flexibility in our spending. What Jimmy Butler and his agent, to your point, Tim, will push back with is all this affects is your luxury tax. It's not cap space or anything like that. It's just your luxury tax bill. So Glenn, pay it.
And I mean, if you're Tom Thibodeau, the guy that's time after time said Jimmy's changed everything. Jimmy set the culture. Jimmy is doing this and that and everything, and he's the guy. Just based on public perception and the way that Tibbs talks about Jimmy and just Tibbs' overall, Timberwolves reputation, who's the guy more likely to fold on a negotiation for Jimmy Butler? I feel like it's Tibbs.
I look at it this way. You can also play that leverage backwards, right? You can say Taj Gibson played well here. He may not have done as well playing for someone else. Derrick Rose bounced around the league, left basketball twice, found a role here, and he's going to make more money than he probably would. I mean, he might just be out of the league at this point if he hadn't come to the Timberwolves. Jimmy's going to play best here. I'm the best coach for him. This is an opportunity to win. And if those three conditions, we can't pay you at age 34, 35 an exorbitant amount of money.
And you know what? I think, too, a lot of people have been talking about the summer of 2019 when we got guys like Clay and Kawhi and a bunch of other big time players who are going to be up as free agents, and Jimmy's name often gets thrown into that pool of, so teams are trying to carve out their max cap space for that year, and it seems to be like this foregone conclusion that Jimmy Butler is going to sign a max. He would get at that max contract out there. And I think if we look back a little more, if we were to jump back to this date a year ago or 2 years ago, we would have been saying similar things like that with a player like DeAndre Jordan, a player like Isaiah Thomas, a player like DeMarcus Cousins. I already say DeAndre Jordan.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Kyle Lowry was another example. And that's what I put in the article yesterday. So sometimes we think of these players as great, but there are market forces that play into this, and really I do think the pool now, given the financial structure, is smaller of the players who are no-brainer max players for every single dollar they can get. And in my opinion, when writing this and just kind of looking into a couple of those teams, financial situation around the league, I'm not sure that max deal is there for Butler, or would be for substantially more money, or a definitely better option than what the Wolves can give, even if the Wolves are doing like a 3-year deal.
Even without Wiggins, you have to think about the other pieces. You're going to put around, so you may not get Kawhi Leonard, right? But you have to get the shooting. I mean, think of how expensive all these little pieces add up to be, even without the big albatross like Wiggins. And in my mind, Cat's one of the few no-brainers where I know his defense is a mess, but
that's the difference between Cat and Butler. It's when they become free agents next season, when their current deals end, you're looking at a 23-year-old versus a 30-year-old. And Jimmy Butler is probably a better basketball player than Cat right now. Maybe he'll be a better basketball player 365 days from now. But in 7 years, Cat will be 30, and in 7 years, Jimmy Butler will be out of the NBA.
Butler also probably will play, 130 games in the next 2 seasons?
Yeah, well, he's averaging 67 games played per season since he became a starter, and that's I mean, of players who haven't had like a catastrophic injury, like an ACL or something, that's a pretty substantial amount of missed time to just kind of be losing games for like knickknacks, right? Like it feels like those are his injuries. I was like kind of scrolling through some of the stuff with Chicago. Obviously, I wasn't watching them as closely, but it was a lot of these like 2-4 games. Okay, Jimmy Butler missed 8 games. It's just, I mean, his style it makes logical sense that he would, get hurt sometimes and miss 6 games in a row.
And at some point, and the reason the 3-year deal makes sense for the Wolves is because, I mean, at some point, your body just breaks down, especially when you're playing that style of basketball. Like the player that I think of is Steve Francis, who played sort of this. I mean, he wasn't the defender that Jimmy Butler was, but he played like his body was just like an object that didn't matter in the lane. And at some point in Orlando, he just fell off. He went from starting all-star caliber point guard to not even like a bench player, and he just fell off completely. And I'm not saying that's going to happen to Jimmy Butler, but the way he plays and history with other old star players that use their bodies the way Jimmy does suggests that in 5 years, the odds of him being anywhere near as good as we saw him last year is not likely.
The negotiations that come to mind for me, just because they were so recent, are the Raptors negotiations last summer with Kyle Lowry, who Lowry was 2 years older than Jimmy is at the time. So it was much easy. I would say it's much easier for like 30-year-old Kyle Lowry to have the negotiations than like I guess it'll be only 1 year when this is happening next year. But like Lowry got 3 years, 90,
100.
Which again, was it 100?
Yeah,
thought I was reading that right.
I mean, whatever. It's the same general
like
boatload of money,
a bucket load of money.
Yeah.
But like a half of a bucket compared to what Butler could get.
Yeah, exactly. But it was like, because Lowry was a full free agent last summer and was in kind of a similar position and plays a demanding defensive style of basketball that may have impacts on his body, albeit from the point guard position instead of from the wing position. But like, Lowry getting only 3 years from the Raptors felt like it made a lot of sense for everybody involved. And while I don't think Jimmy is nearly as clear-cut, I think that Kyle Lowry is a comparable class of player to where Jimmy is.
Yeah, well,
is that fair?
I agree. I mean, so Kyle Lowry made the All-NBA team in 2015-16, and then he didn't make the All-NBA team in 2016-17, and that's when he became a free agent. So I think it's pretty safe to say that Kyle Lowry is a fringe All-NBA player. Butler, is maybe slightly ahead of that with what's happened the last 2 years, but maybe what happens next season is Jimmy Butler doesn't make the All-NBA team. He would kind of fall into that if there was a fourth team there. Then you're pretty much at a very similar place as to where Kyle Lowry was. Kyle Lowry was going to be going back to a team that had a really big contract to a shoot first wing in DeMar DeRozan, there Andrew Wiggins. They had Jonas Valanciunas, the Wolves' Gorgie Jang. I mean, they had a lot of difficult similarities, and so I think he got negotiated down.
And the other issue there, looking at kind of another similarity, is you always worry that the Wolves become like the Clippers, right, where you're kind of out in the second round and out. Isn't that kind of Toronto, right? Toronto, really expensive team, really big hype, can't beat the Cavs.
They can't. No,
I mean, if the Wolves get the 1 seed in the West next year and lose in the second round, there are some things that I'll be very happy about.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the difference between Toronto and the Clippers is just that I think people actually thought the Raptors could make the finals. I don't think anyone ever thought the Chris Paul Clippers could make the finals. Like, as the season would go on, at the end of a regular season.
I'm actually trying to think back. I can't even really remember because their like kind of peak was right at the beginning of the Warriors, right?
It was, yeah, I think so. But like, who else? This was like when the Heat were really good. So who was really good in the West at this point? Why am I blanking right now?
San Antonio.
San Antonio. Okay. Yeah.
They won the championship.
Oh yeah. And then they almost won it another time.
Good.
I don't know. There was never a point at the end of any Clippers run where I felt like this team could really, really beat the Spurs or the Warriors or anything like that.
They had some losses in the playoffs that they probably shouldn't have had, but there was always this specter of a bigger team hiding down in the next series.
And but that like specter is there because from the idea that Tom is bringing up of their core wasn't enough. It as crazy as that sounds, they had, DeAndre Jordan was their third best player, and he made the All NBA team 3 straight seasons.
Yeah, Chris Paul is leading the Rockets, or an important part of the Rockets team, right?
JJ Redick,
was awesome.
Yeah, big difference maker for the Sixers. Yeah,
and so. But it becomes that question that we've had before of what are you going for? Where am I trying to get my team? Am I all right if the expected value of my team's season is between the first and second round? And obviously that's something you need to reassess every single season. But if that's where the expected value of your team is, you are so far away from being an NBA champion. And if being an NBA champion is the ultimate goal, particularly maybe with this team, this Timberwolves team, it's like, God, is this somewhat futile to keep going forward with this core? And I would say no, it's not, because I don't know what else to do. You can't.
Is this?
Go ahead.
Is this the late 2000s Atlanta Hawks paradigm where they'd make the playoffs every year and that was what it was? They'd be the 6 to 8 seed and get bounced in 5 games in the first series. And I feel like that fan base got to the point where they're just we want either do something more or just get out of the playoffs for a season. And they were just kind of always there. And the question then for Timberwolves followers of all shapes and sizes is being a perennial playoff team, but always being a first or second round out. Is that satisfying?
People were
not
not
good enough.
We know it's not, because the Flip Wolves, I feel like towards the end, were really criticized for first round and out, right?
Well, and the Raptors are too. I don't know if there's any fan base that's just
Can I make a case for it?
Yeah.
This might not be a good one. What if this is just a way to weigh out the Warriors and keep Cat around until that Warriors run?
So
maybe the Warriors just seem like this unattainable goal to get to, unless you're Houston, maybe. Ben,
no,
I think
this
current crop of players, they just stay relevant and stay competent, so free agents will eventually look at you. And then once maybe the Warriors start to fade, however that may happen,
it just sucks is that the free agents can never come. That's what the issue is. It makes sense in theory because they need to be waiting out the work. That's my opinion.
I'll rephrase that.
Said the same thing.
Something would have to happen other than free agent signing. Cat would have to become a revolutionary type. Honestly, yeah, something like that to make it where a Ray Allen signs with Miami type signing, or Shane Battier with Miami type thing starts happening. Those would need to pile up for.
But Cassell and Sprewell were both free agents, right? When they signed,
they traded
for how they did.
They traded for Sam Cassell.
But it's still, you guys. It's so much harder right now. In the league to get those guys. I'm not saying it's impossible.
When they traded for Cassell, it was because Terrell Brandon had this big fat expiring contract that didn't exist. He wasn't playing. It was just $14 million off the books for Sam Cassell.
That's entirely fair. I think the other thing you have to think through is getting into the playoffs is exciting when this first starts, right?
Not taking that away.
The game they won against Houston was
a good time.
Phenomenal, right? So I think it actually, when you look at the timelines, it does kind of make sense that as long as you show some progress, the other thing in the back of your head is you have to think through the financials of, well, what's our move then when the Warriors start to come apart or Houston starts to come apart? What's our move that we execute it and get to that? You have to have, you can't be in cap hell at that point, to take that next step.
So, what you're saying is finding a way to have flexibility. I think they say
deal Wiggins at that point, maybe, or something.
Remaining lean, giving yourself the opportunity to pivot. Those, I think, would all be those. If you're running the Timberwolves like a business, that's how you would want to best manage the assets. It's just difficult given what the set of assets are. With Andrew Wiggins, we can be upset about the contract and stuff, and maybe you could have done it a little differently and let him go over to restricted free agency this summer. But you weren't just going to let Andrew Wiggins walk.
No, that's
you know. And it's so maybe the deal in restricted free agency, he ends up getting $5 million less a season. And I know maybe some people are like, still not worth that. He would have got offered that by somebody.
That's still a win for the Wolves if he ends up getting paid $5 million less this season.
But it absolutely is. But you're still in this reality where you're like, he's still making $20 million, you know? And then you still, even in that situation, you go from 90% of your cap between Towns, Butler, and Wiggins down to 85, you know? And it's just like it was always going to be a difficult proposition to put this team in place, to stay lean, to have the opportunity to pivot. And really, I think what the team is, I remember us having this conversation like months ago where we talked about somebody on the team needs to be the Draymond to make that like.
I was just thinking about that conversation.
Right?
That was exactly what I was going to bring up was it's not necessarily the top end of the talent that needs to make the jump. They need a second round pick to make the jump and become an integral part of the team, or they need the Tyus Jones, they need the 20 pick this year. They've something weird has to happen for this.
I think it's a really strong argument to say that you have to use that 20th pick.
As in keep it?
As in keep it. I mean, I just because I like dinking around with trades and stuff, I've thrown a lot out on Twitter and stuff of like Gorgie Jang plus the pick, you know, to get somebody like a Jordan Clarkson or DeMar Carroll back, something like that to find a way to get off of it. But in reality, like you're still in, even if you get rid of Gorgie Jang, you're still in financial trouble. You need to hit on that second round guy or that whatever. You need on a young player like David was just bringing up. And really the options seem to be Tyus Jones, Justin Patton, or the 20th pick. I don't know where that other fourth player comes from other than that, right?
Derrick Rose. I mean...
Yeah,
he's not going to be able to play enough for that to work. Yeah, I don't think that player's on this team right now. I'll put it that way.
I will say I don't think it's likely that Derrick Rose has like a somewhat of a resurgence into being like okay, this guy's a meaningful player, borderline like starter player. Like I could see that, but how many years does that last for?
And how many minutes per game does it last in the immediate?
Exactly. Even in like a healthy timeline for next year, he's still done it, and he's third. You know, we want that fourth guy, the Draymond, to be on the team in 2020, 2021, something like that. Right when Cat and Wiggins hit 25, maybe Butler's like kind of winding into like a good Carmelo on the Thunder type of role, like that, and then you have another fourth player in there, like they had with Steven Adams or something, you know, something like that. But you need to hit. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, you have the future of the other pieces of the starting lineup, because at that point, someone else will be starting at the 4 for the Wolves. Someone else will be starting at point guard for the Wolves. I think that's pretty clear. That probably Jeff Teague and Taj Gibson will have moved on from the team by 2020, 2021, whenever that is. And whether that's like if the Wolves get into a negotiation this summer and get Tyus Jones re-signed for a number of years on a team-favorable contract, and he moves into that starting role in sometime within the next 2 seasons, whether that's they move on and find another free agent point guard, whether that's the draft pick this year, whether it's the draft pick next year, those are those surrounding pieces, and finding what can line up with your star talent is that question.
I think it's interesting with Tyus Jones. I just don't really think he has like the ceiling to be that type of player, but something that's like kind of in line with that. And to take the Warriors example too, everyone says they were able to get Kevin Durant because the salary cap spiked. They're also able to get him because Steph Curry signed his second deal for $12 million a year because he had all those ankle injuries and stuff. Yeah. Steph was like a super value contract. I mean, when he won the MVP twice, he was making $12 million each year.
It was Russell Wilson with the Seahawks, right?
Oh, yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, yeah. Sorry,
lost some other people.
No, it took my brain a while to check.
He plays quarterback.
Well, so my point there is he plays quarterback, wasn't paid much. They were able to build out this big defense with all the extra money.
Well, and it's just about needing to find those value type of contracts. And I think what an opportunity is with Tyus this summer in extension talks. And he hasn't really got his opportunity to truly like show himself. A lot of people, watch all 82 games. Are like, okay, Tyus Jones, and like the stat wonks out there are like, oh, let's look at his plus minus and his starting lineup and all that. But I think like the league at large, if he was a free agent restricted free agent this summer, he wouldn't get like any sort of big deal or something. So if they could find a way to like give Tyus Jones like a 4-year, $20 million extension this year.
That would be so nice.
I mean,
that would be amazing.
It would be amazing, and I don't think it's out of the question. People are going to be so surprised. I'm just telling you, so surprised when I know we've brought up Avery Bradley a bunch and all those other wings. People are going to be signing for so little money this summer because there is not cap space out there.
I think the other thing you have to factor in is, does he want to be here? If he does, given local connection, I think sometimes term outweighs the actual year-to-year dollar amount.
And then if he's in, maybe there's the 5% chance he becomes the Draymond. Otherwise, you have another guy to be that next point guard that David was talking about.
That's another, like he's almost betting on himself. He's like, in 4 years, I'm going to get a big extension because I'll be the starter.
Yep. I mean, and Tyus is so young still, too. 21, right?
Yeah, he's 20. I mean, he's Cat's draft class, right? They were both freshmen.
And you'd easily sign him if he was the starter to a 5-year deal through age 30, right? If he pans out optimally.
Yeah. I like
so far in
but
yeah.
I think it's
hard to figure out what Tyus' ceiling is right now, and that's what's making that number so difficult. I know he's a fan favorite, and that plus-minus number is very favorable to him, and if you're his agent, you're plugging that like crazy. Like, look what he can do with a good starting lineup in the starting lineup. But, I mean, there were also moments this year where his lack of size really showed, and there were moments where he would kind of just disappear, and Jeff Teague needed to be in the game where he really looked like a backup point guard. So it's really hard to determine his value right now.
Comparative to our expectations for what Tyus Jones was going to be this season,
totally.
Especially on defense, I feel like he just blew them out of the water.
Yeah, no, I'm not denying that at all. I'm just saying in terms of what he actually is and what his peak could be, it's just really hard to tell right now. But there's no doubt that he's proven that he's going to be an NBA player, barring injury, of course, in 5 years.
You know, it's interesting to think, now we're kind of on this Tyus rabbit hole, but it's fun to think about roster moves at this point in the season when you have the opportunity to just turn on a playoff game at night.
Right.
Because then if I'm thinking about player X or player Y, I go, how would that player fit in this game? And I think about it with Tyus Jones. And while, I think he made huge defensive strides this season, and I agree with what David is saying, Tyus Jones would be getting exposed in any of these series. I mean, look at if he was the starting point guard for the Celtics. Terry Rozier is probably 3-4 inches taller than him, way longer, and the Cavs, every opportunity they can get, are just bringing LeBron's guy to get the switch. So it's Terry Rozier onto LeBron James. So I guess tying that together with what you were saying before, Tom, about him possibly being the starter of the future, there's he just might not ever be able to be good enough to be a playoff caliber starting.
I was
point
more
guard.
trying to get into his head and think through how he would make a decision.
And that is what I think will do. And there's some logic to that. And he could still develop.
He could still, we just talked about his defensive surge, or David did. What if he takes more steps defensively and he's not able to be exposed? He figures something like that. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility, but at the same time,
he's not going to grow, though.
It's more likely that he's still going to probably be exposed on defense, as smart as he is, and that's what makes it so complicated.
But the Wolves will never run a switching defense, and that's huge. That is helpful for a small point guard like that.
Right.
So, yeah.
And it's the kind of thing where, in a world where you think about the small point guards across the league who maybe have been struggled and targeted on defense, Steph is the first place you go on that, right? Steph was always thought of potentially as a defensive liability for the Warriors, and he was early in his career, just because he doesn't have as much size as some other guys do. And it's when you can pair him with an elite defensive player at the 2, like a Klay Thompson, you can hide him somewhat, and you can. And
I would say with the center too, Bogut was really helpful too there. Having not only the help on the perimeter of Thompson, but also when they had Bogut
and Draymond freelancing everywhere.
Exactly, totally. I'm with you there, David.
Yeah, that's the thing is if Tyus is one of those guys that he is the smarts and he can get in passing lanes and he can get steals in that way, but just in terms of physical matchups, having a team around him that can help that, which honestly the Wolves have a lot of physical tools that looks like that should work.
Yeah.
There are things that can work with that.
Totally. Do we want to... We're already talking about the Warriors a little bit. Do we want to jump into the playoffs? The Warriors just beat the Rockets by a lot of points.
Dude,
last night.
What the heck? So crazy.
Well, let's say this first. Go ahead, David.
I was out. I was at the Minnesota United game last night, covering that game for ZoneCoverage.com, and so I was on Twitter on and off throughout the game. The game tipped at about halftime of the Minnesota United game, so I watched the beginning of it and watched like the Rockets figure it out. And I'm seeing my timeline just like the Rockets are up by 17 points in the first quarter. Like, this series is over. Golden State's been broken. Steve Kerr's going to get fired. Somebody's going to leave. And I'm like, guys,
you got a weird
remember
timeline.
That the Golden State Warriors are the Golden State Warriors?
I mean, it's all the
y'all
Houston
forgot
people.
For a little bit. They did kind of what I expected.
People do need. I mean, that's not unheard of.
You don't say.
Yeah, I mean, even with the Warriors, who are proven.
It's really interesting. I was talking about this with a friend the other day. In listening to the podcast, even like the big guys out there, the Zach Lowe's and whatever, and they have on their guests, and immediately after a game, there's so much recency bias of they haven't even really had the game
Always.
time
Yes.
for the game to process. And I'm not necessarily blaming them. I think I would, probably live in the same reality. That's how I would be too. But it was it's crazy, like the somewhat writing like the Warriors obituary after Game 5, or they've done that with with LeBron, and then it switches and it goes the other way, and we're so tied to what happened in the last game.
Or even like the end of the regular season, Portland was like light years ahead of everybody else by the end of the regular season. Everyone thought Portland had separated themselves as clearly the third best team in the West. And then they just get smoked in the first round by New Orleans, who everyone was kind of down on.
Well, not only that, didn't think they'd make the playoffs, right, without Cousins.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's insane how much things can switch up. But
I mean, it would have been devastating to lose without Chris Paul at home to the Rock.
But at the same time, Houston was up like 19 points.
They were up
something.
61-50, I believe, and shooting 50% from the field, I think, or from
Something,
three, maybe.
They were up by they got outscored by like 40 in the second half. It was crazy. I mean,
and it really was the third quarter.
yeah.
I mean, at least that made the
But
difference.
in this case, they didn't leave it at the third quarter, because if I recall, the Warriors have had some really good third quarters, Steph specifically. But in this one, like, Steph was hitting okay, but Klay Thompson was hitting absolutely everything, and I think it became pretty clear pretty quickly how valuable Chris Paul has become to this team, because once James Harden got kind of in a rut, they didn't really have anywhere else to go, and the Warriors just totally took advantage, especially considering the Warriors, when they're locked in, are like at least a top 2 defensive team.
Well, and I think that's because Chris Paul's not only just a good defender, but he was a good transition defender, and transition defense is so important against a Warriors team that can set a drag screen and just pull up and pop a three within 5 seconds of starting the play. And what happens, what I was seeing last night in the game is the Rockets have 2 players who go and execute transition defense every single time, and that's PJ Tucker and Trevor Ariza. And then now you're mixing in Eric Gordon, who does it right like half the time, mixing in Gerald Green, who does it right even less than that, and they're not as fine-tuned defenders and understanding and seeing the floor. And when you lose that half a second against the Warriors, and it's okay, you can't play 5 perfect defenders all the time, but without having Chris Paul, they're forced to play 2 of those guys who are liabilities. And I think we've seen Harden also be a liability due to fatigue in his defensive game also. So it's not just that I don't know if it's like sustainable for the Rockets to have that type of shooting as they did in the first quarter for a whole game. I wonder if through elements of fatigue and just like execution as the game goes on, if the Rockets can execute defensively at a level that's high enough to stop that barrage of Steph Curry threes or whatever from happening. It's so hard to do for 48 minutes, and this is why the Warriors are just waiting to pop on you as soon as it becomes a hole, and they have so many different options for doing it. I want Houston to win.
Yeah,
but it's just it was deflating.
It was deflating. There was a Woj report that Chris Paul likely not going to play Game 7, right?
There were reports that even if they make the finals, he might not be available for the finals.
So you're feeling...
Dude, I love the possibility of it being just because I love like chaos.
Uh-huh.
Like CP3-less Rockets team in the finals
Against Boston. Let's go.
Against Boston or Cleveland. It's like anybody can win.
I will say this.
Anybody can win.
I think it's interesting that the Boston home court advantage is such an advantage. And when you come to when you talk about Houston, they always they're very sly about it, but they're like, it's a little quiet in there. Like, I think that's funny that the people always kind of disregard what the home court can do. And to my knowledge, Boston's the young kids.
Well, and that'll be the game tonight, and having that home court in a Game 7 in the playoffs is so valuable. Yeah, I mean, it just is.
It's also,
it is.
From LeBron's standpoint, I know that New York's always been the place that he shows up, and the Knicks are always bad. But I wonder if in LeBron's head, personally, he's like, dude, I got to do something in Boston, because that is... historically a very important place of basketball.
I mean, he's also historically just really good whenever his team's about to get eliminated.
And scored 46 points, right? Or whatever.
Those stat lines are just absurd.
Like, I saw somebody...
every elimination game he's the last 10 years is just absurd.
Yeah.
Yeah, he just channels Cleveland Andrew Wiggins.
LeBron listens to this and just burn it down.
Oh, God. If the Wolves ever play Cleveland in the
All right.
finals, the Wolves are going to win, and Andrew Wiggins will be finals MVP.
Actually, we don't want any home games at Target Center.
You guys,
we're going to just camp out
can
in
we just
Akron.
stay in Cleveland? No, really.
Can you imagine they just burn it down? They're like, no, we will not play here.
A negotiation. It's going to have to be a neutral site, man.
Did you? So okay, on the Boston Cleveland series, did you guys see? There was a story with a quote from George Hill after game 6, I want to say, where he played really well in game 6. Cleveland got the win, and he's like, "Yeah, I ate my proper Chipotle order, got my barbacoa on it, everything was good." And all the comments are like, Danny Ainge needs to close every Chipotle in the greater Boston area and prevent this from happening in game 7.
It's funny. I mean, there just has to be more to that than we understand of the comfort. Not only just the fan part. I think that that's intuitive.
Yeah.
The fan part makes sense, but I think it's us as fans to understand what having that routine is for those guys before games.
Sleep in your own bed.
Yeah, I mean whatever that cliche is, but it seems
Not
to be
being in a hotel. Yeah,
I mean, just
think that totally matters.
I talked to someone who was at the game, and they say you feel it, even as just a neutral observer.
Dude, you totally do.
Yeah.
When Dane and I were in Houston for round 1, part of it's because I hadn't been to a playoff game since I was a teenager, but it makes a difference, man. The difference in volume, crowd volume for a playoff game versus a regular season game is insane. And I'm just imagining being out there playing basketball. It would be impossible not to get amped up if you were the home team.
Well, and I think go ahead, David.
The thing that I actually feel like I can relate to this pretty well, because it makes me think of what I do and have done as a musician my entire life. Because that was every time I was getting ready for a performance, for a concert, for my senior recital, for anything, I tried to do as many things within my routine and my comfort zone as possible, just so I could set it up like I was going into the practice room to do work, to set it up like I was just going to run through my stuff, same as every other day. And that kind of performance preparation is the same thing I picture with these athletes as their routine is. You've got your routine, you've got your things to put you in comfort zone, and you play at your best, you perform at your best when you're comfortable.
And I think what's weird, and I'm just trying to compare that against playing sports growing up, and you're so much of playing sports, whether it's traveling in even at a really young age or in high school, going wherever. It's I don't feel like I ever really had a routine in. I don't feel like when I played basketball in high school at home, I don't feel like that was, other than your friends and stuff are there. But
I also, you have to think they're young players, and they probably love it that they take, one action they take gets them going again, right? Big three, a big block, a steal,
exactly.
whatever.
Imagine just the beginning of a game when it's 6-3 and you get a wide open 3, before you're even shooting or in the process of shooting, the crowd is starting to stand up and get their hands up, and then the shot goes in. The amount of
fatigue that you'd feel in a regular game, or especially a road playoff game, I feel like it's going to be pushed to the side when you have that much crowd noise behind you. I feel like that really matters.
And some of these guys have to. It seems like young players never really grasp the gravity of like the legacy or the history of the franchise. But you're wearing Bird, right? You got to imagine a lot of these young guys are like, hey, I could become the next.
Or Zydrunas Ilgauskas.
Tim's wearing a Zydrunas Ilgauskas shirt.
Which is a
and
phenomenal
I just realized
shirt.
you're wearing a Miami Heat set of flip-flops.
Because there's nothing better than the Miami Heat.
David, are you
Vice.
wearing any Eastern Conference NBA gear perchance?
Currently, I'm not wearing my Kevin Love's Cleveland Cavaliers championship T-shirt that I own, which is the only thing.
Well, go put it on. And then we can continue.
And then we'll continue to talk. But, yeah, I got to imagine, too, they got to kind of conceptualize, like, hey, if I play well here, I'm going to stick around here and could become to the city what another player was.
Yeah.
You know what people say all the time is like, if they're engaged, they're such a good team. And a lot of times that is like labeled as these guys are being like, oh, J.R. Smith's just like a bum and he's lazy and this and this. But they're like, when J.R. Smith is engaged, he's like, the Cavs are at another level.
Yeah.
And to me, what engaged actually means is it's finding something early in a game that gets you going. Is that three that you're talking about, Tim? Like that, you don't like come to the game and you're like, it's predetermined if you're engaged or not engaged that night. I think 99% of the time that's not how it works. It's what happens at the beginning of the game that engages you or doesn't.
I mean, it sounds messed up, but there's quarterbacks that like to get hit, right? They'd be like, I want to feel it right away. I feel like I'm in the action.
And apparently, Taj Gibson wants to shoot like 11 shots.
Yeah. I mean, whatever. Do what you want. But no, that makes a lot of sense. You could see J.R. Smith going off. Once he hits one, he's like, I'm feeling it. I know this is going to be my night or something like that.
And it just translates to both ends. It's like, yeah, if you didn't get that shot in the first quarter on offense, then you're making these defensive lapses on the other end.
I know this is an unfair tie to Wiggins, but do you think Wiggins in the back of his mind would be like, I'd love to go to Toronto and be like Vince Carter?
I'm sure. I mean,
it's got to be, right?
That doesn't mean that he's actively pursuing it, but I'm sure he grew up hoping to play for the Raptors.
Do you think, like, if he signs there, do you see, like, an image of him wearing the old Raptors jersey with Carter or something like that? Like, I just wonder how much that matters to players.
He strikes me as someone that's how do I say it? Not a lot matters to him. I don't think a lot matters to him. I think it would be,
but
it would be the shrug. I mean, not nothing.
But we
right,
see him at his best,
but not in the way that like you would be like, I want him to grow up and be shortstop for the Minnesota Twins or something like that. Like, I'm serious. I think it's just like it's different because you have a different personality than Andrew Wiggins does.
I think, like, just based on reading him and talking to him, the one thing that gets him going, or the two things, are the city of Toronto and Vince Carter. So to answer your question,
you think Vince is a big part of it?
I think Vince is a huge part of it.
Do you think the Wolves? I'm serious. Wouldn't that fit? He's a 3-point shooter at this point.
Is he going to play next year? God, I'd be so happy.
Why couldn't that happen?
Tom's so excited. It could happen. He's a free agent. It could happen.
I think they should do that.
I
just thought of that.
Man, it would be like
turn the key. I mean,
like,
he's
hey, Wiggins,
20 years older than him.
Oh my God!
Yeah. No,
I just think of the one player that matters most in Toronto.
Have you seen that Vince Carter documentary on Netflix, perchance?
No,
I've heard.
This Canadian boom in basketball coincides completely with when Vince Carter joined the Raptors. Like, think about Canadian basketball other than Steve Nash 15 years ago. It was him and like Jamal McGlure, and that was it.
What about Mo Pete?
Is he Canadian?
Oh, I don't know. If
he played for the Raptors. Yeah. And then suddenly Vince Carter's there, and now you have like
Corey Joseph,
Wiggins, you have the
Anthony
Josephs.
Bennett.
Yeah.
You have. I mean, seriously, you have Anthony Bennett, you have Tristan Thompson, you have Jamal Murray, and they're all the same age, and they all were kids when Vince Carter was amazing. I don't think that's a coincidence.
I think that is a good point. What do you think, David? Are you listening to us? Do you want Vince Carter?
He went to go get his Kevin Love
I would definitely take Vince Carter. I'm pretty sure I brought that up a while back as a potential signing for next season because that would be fun. I would enjoy seeing that. He probably won't defend very well, but it'll be fun.
Here's the thing: is what they should have done is given up a second-round pick for him at the deadline.
Yeah.
If you wanted it. I mean, it would have been like. Then you have the chance to kind of like roll it back like KG style. Then you don't have to use any because, I mean, I don't know if he would sign for the minimum or not, but like the downside of signing him this season is that then you can't go after the Avery Bradley or somebody else like that.
No, they totally should.
If the option is Vince Carter or like Marcus Smart, Avery Bradley, then sorry, Vinsanity.
It is interesting though, and I've this kind of ties back to the Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan thing, and maybe we've talked about it too. But is finding a teammate of Wiggins's that can turn that key in,
kind of like what KG was to Cat.
To Cat, I just think, and I think that did happen to some extent with Cat. I think more typically what we see in the NBA is it's players who are similar in age. It's like big brother, little brother, but like in a realistic age range, like
no, yeah.
But Ticket was
not like father son.
Yeah, exactly that. Like KG could like be Cat's dad. We want like that DeMar DeRozan, Kyle Lowry. It's this little age gap where they're friends.
I mean,
and there's something because we need to use your term, Tom. He needs that electrical shock or at least a couple of cups of coffee.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know who that is.
That would be.
I think if there's
Butler.
anyone, it would be. I mean, God, the idea of Andrew Wiggins playing while Vince Carter is sitting on the benches. I feel like that would impact him.
Right. I'm all for it. I'm just saying. I think
I know what you're saying.
The bigger picture one is like. Maybe that's Kemba Walker. Maybe Kemba Walker's that guy.
I mean, it was supposed to be Jimmy Butler, right? And maybe they're just two different personalities.
And but I think that is the stuff that goes into front office work that we can't. How can we speculate on that? How do we know like who the type of personality is that might be able to wring something more out of Wiggins than the other one? I think those are crucial decisions.
I think you can also say that's kind of why you can be fearful of Wiggins' development. Is Butler is such a perfect big brother for a Wiggins type player,
unless the personalities just don't matter. No one cares more than Jimmy Butler. Like I really think that's the case.
And Andrew Wiggins, for all his natural talent, seems very big on. I mean, it's no fault of his own. He seems like he has a really close knit group of friends that he kind of just surrounds himself with, and I don't want to say secludes himself to, but that's kind of his thing. And he's got his dog. He got another dog. Thanks, Twitter.
I was going to say, I think we need to let him have the dogs at the game. I think that's the play.
I think you're onto something.
They're wolves. They're wolves.
Yeah,
they're wolves.
Oh my God, no! Now I totally forgot what I was.
Their names are. Oh man, this is bad. Okay, so. You already forgot?
Yeah, I forgot what I was going to say, but
shoot your shot, Larry Bird.
I don't know. It just something's got to, I think, change in that way. Oh, this is what I was thinking of. We talked a lot about how it went. Andrew Wiggins' career went flip, and then it was a new coach Mitchell, and then it was a new coach Thibodeau. That's three coaches over 3 seasons, and I think maybe what we're and that was in a way a forgiveness of his lack of development over those 3 years. And that's fair. Any player would be somewhat hindered by 3 coaching changes. Maybe what we didn't consider enough is that in year 4, yes, it was the same coach, but it was almost a similar change in adding Jimmy Butler to the mix. That is another
complete cultural overhaul.
Yeah, and what is a coach? That's what a coach is, right? Is a cultural overhaul. So maybe they were still running a lot of the same stuff, which actually they weren't really. I mean, there was a lot of like systemic changes this season too, and
a ton
in the way that they played. So I don't know. Yeah, we need Vince Carter, but also maybe just what Andrew Wiggins needs is some continuity. And he's a kid. I mean, or a very young adult. Like that stuff matters to humans, you know. And it's having those relationships around you, and it's having the pieces in place.
They traded away his best bud, right? And you brought in a guy who's not the coach's favorite player, right?
Yeah, so, that's weird. I mean, it's just
and he's no longer the number 1 or number 2 option. I mean, in terms of shots attempted,
arguably, you said at times he was 4 behind Teague.
I would totally say that.
Or 5 behind Taj. Honestly, in terms of efficiency and production, there were more games than I think people would let on that where he was the 5th best starter.
There's just like you're watching a game and you're like, okay, they're playing through this player, and a lot of the times we know that was Butler, and then at the end of the season they played through Teague a lot, and then at times like and such they would go through Taj when the matchups were there, play through Taj. Obviously they played through Cat a lot too. You know, I mean, I know Wiggins got a lot of shots, but they didn't necessarily play through Andrew Wiggins that much, and in a lot of different situations he would have had that opportunity. I'm not suggesting they necessarily should have, because he's not a very efficient player, but it's interesting. whenever the time comes that if his time ends and we write that article or really look back into the Andrew Wiggins experience here, hopefully, it's 5 years down the road after a championship or something. But yeah, he's had a really bizarre life in Minnesota, and he's a really unique character.
And that was kind of Rubio, right? Rubio was like, he looked like a beetle. He didn't want to come. He's here. He becomes like
he looks like a
he did.
That's your first Ricky Rubio characteristic.
Yeah, when he came here, he looked like a beetle.
I'm not like anybody else, just the Beatles.
I'm not like Ringo Starr.
But yeah, and then he kind of slowly people really came to love him, and then all of a sudden he divides the fan base and he's out, right? I mean, it was a really bizarre Rubio experience.
And it's funny, it's like you just said that right there, and he divides the fan base, and I was like, what, did he divide the fan base? Oh, of course he divided the fan base. But like now when I think about Ricky Rubio, I think about all the people who still love him.
He's playing well.
Everyone still loves him. So it's, I don't know. Yeah, the post-mortem Andrew Wiggins like article or conversation is going to be an interesting one someday.
If it ever happens.
If it ever happens.
What if he finishes his career here? Whoa.
Like Larry Bird, the next Larry Bird. Or is it Junius Lagauskas? Does he play his whole career?
No, Miami.
Oh, yeah,
I think he won a title in Miami.
Yeah.
Bummer.
You're right.
Woo! Zadrunas.
No, there's He's wearing Zadrunas Lagauskas sandals. This is great for podcast material.
Take that, Celtics.
Yep.
This podcast has gone off the rails. Anything else we want to talk about? Anyone come up with any fun trade scenarios recently? I saw the Jordan Clarkson one on Twitter, Dane. I don't know if you've had anything new, Dane or David.
We moved on from it a bit, but one thing I wanted to say about Warriors Rockets is that Klay Thompson is unbelievable. Like just
turns out,
blooded ridiculous. Tim and I actually were sitting around earlier this week and watched the highlights of the 37-point quarter he had a couple of years ago against the Kings, and it's just like for him to be what he is and just able to have these moments where he can shoot better than anyone in the world on some of the biggest stages at some of the biggest times for his team is unreal.
I thought it was interesting. I was listening to Zach Lowe with Marcus Thompson, who writes for The Athletic in the Bay Area, and he was describing the locker room after Game 5, and he said he was talking to Klay, and Klay was like, I just want to play Game 6 right now. Like
literally
like right
in
now.
20 minutes.
Yes, I want to like the game's over. Awesome. And he was just like, not like in like an angry any sort of way. He was just like, I don't know, the way Thompson put it was cool. And I was like, I could see that. Like when Klay gets like kind of the I don't know, like the stoner vibe for a lot of people, but
he's a weird ass dude. I don't know what his vibe is for me, but
he's a killer.
Fire.
But then he's a killer in his own sort of way. And yeah, that was awesome to watch last night. Man, Eric Gordon, talk about the killer instinct too,
and knew he had to step up, right?
Yeah, I mean both games 5 and 6, Eric Gordon can play defense. I guess I hope for Andrew Wiggins, Karl Towns. I mean, it was there was just like how did KD put it? King hoopers out there, just guys who, I don't know, just so confident in their game, and I think KD is like the quintessential example about that. Maybe even to a fault. We can kind of maybe go into the finals once they're already predetermined, but there's been a lot of interesting stuff with KD, and I think I'm going to write about it in his isolation compared to what's going on with the Wolves. I mean, they're similar. I mean, functioning somewhat similarly there too in isolation. But I don't know, man. It's such these playoffs have been so fun. Like, what the heck? 2 Game 7s, first time since 1979.
And the beginning of the series, both of them were like, I think it was a bunch of blowouts, and now in Games 5 and 6 in both series, the games have gotten exciting. Thank God.
The other narratives are interesting in that like this may be Houston's kind of window, right? Like right now,
right.
Boston is kind of like a shocked the world in the sense that people thought maybe the Sixers were the team that kind of the youth and all that, and I think they're going to be the next Warriors. Go ahead.
Boston's playing with so much house money.
Right.
For them to be doing this without their two best guys, they've been on house money since like the second round. It's ridiculous.
Completely. And I think there's a little Warriors thing where it was fun when the Warriors were really good, right? Like when they first start getting good. And then I think they're a team that people can get sick of really quick because I think they're going to be there every year, right? They're going to be kind of in the mix, assuming, again, Hayward and Kyrie mix in well with what they have there.
Well, we already know Kyrie mixes in well with
So I mean, I'm saying them together.
The Hayward thing is going to be interesting. I don't know. We literally saw him play like 5 minutes and then he was out. But the thing about Hayward has always been he doesn't necessarily need 15 seconds with the ball in his hands, dribbling and a screen set for him and a drive and kick. He's not like James Harden. He can. He's honestly like a small forward offensively, at least version of Horford, in that he doesn't need to be used that much to be super effective. He can shoot really well from the corner. He can pass, but he can also play like an all-star caliber player. I think he's going to fit fine with this team when he comes back.
Well, it's adding another one of those wings that to. I mean, what makes Boston's defense so good is these wings that have the ability to switch and react and stay in front of the other all the Cavs. I mean, they are an elite defensive team, and their one biggest hole, I'd say, defensively in this series has been Terry Rozier. Kyrie Irving isn't necessarily isn't a better defender than Terry Rozier, but you put in Kyrie Irving there, and you've now he is a far better offensive player than Terry Rozier. So it's like the Celtics put another coin into their "this is what we're great at" pile of wing defenders, and another guy who improves their biggest weakness. I mean, I know it's not in a direct sort of way, but it actually I think the fit could be fine so long as we don't see any of the players like having any sort of I don't know, concern like a Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum about minutes being lost to Gordon Hayward, because to some extent that'll happen. But look how many guys have had to play this year. Everyone's gotten hurt for them.
And like the idea that they could have a Hayward who's always, or just over the last few years at least, been a really steady force offensively. The idea that if like Brown or Tatum are just having an off or invisible night, the idea that they have a guy like Hayward to just throw in there, or not even throw in there, but he's like their default guy, and then they can pick between the best of Tatum, Brown, and Hayward. That's not fair.
Well, and the Cleveland games have been the ones that they've been losing, and they've been losing because they've hit in these walls offensively.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, Kyrie, you talk about being able to break through a wall, like, and Hayward. That if the Celtics don't make it this season, it's because the Cavs took away Al Horford so much. And then in those games, when Al Horford wasn't playing, if Marcus Morris wasn't able to score, if Jason Tatum was disappearing, you got no shot. Now they're gonna, be able to throw in Kyrie and Gordon Hayward in those situations.
There's something very death lineup-y in the future where I could see like a Horford, Hayward, Brown, Tatum, Kyrie lineup.
Yeah,
I could see them throwing that out there and just I mean.
That might be their starters.
So much switching, man. That's just a terrifying thought.
Yeah. No, it's gonna be a blast. So that game's tonight. So we're talking about the Celtics, as maybe people are listening to this already know what happened. But yes. I don't know. That series is actually, I was gonna say that series has been awesome. It's awesome that it's got to Game 7.
Yeah.
A couple of the games have not been that great.
It's been LeBron that's been awesome, right?
Yeah.
How does he keep doing that?
LeBron individually and the Celtics collectively when they play really
completely.
well.
Yeah, completely.
And it's one of the two. I hope that what happened in Game 7 is both of those things like collide. And that's the whole.
Yes.
My other thought from the Golden State series is it was really, really good to see Patrick McCaw on an NBA floor again last night.
Yeah.
Because that was like we've talked a lot about the injury moments of the season, how they defined it. McCaw's injury was like the scariest thing I've ever seen on an NBA floor since like Paul George's injury in that scrimmage. Like McCaw's injury was terrifying, and the fact that he's already back from a spine injury is really cool to see.
For sure,
he could with Iggy out, and if I don't know if that like lingers. I'm not sure McCaw gets a bigger role like in Game 7, but he could be. I mean, he'll be in the rotation for the finals. I would assume.
He should be. Yeah.
They're like sneaky, not deep. The Warriors, like
That's come up like that late in this series.
Yeah,
I feel like narrative.
Well, it's because like somehow they tried to copy Tom Thibodeau and fill up half the roster with centers.
It's the way to do it, dude.
That's the I guess
It's a big man's game.
Outside of the box. Maybe,
It's slow and confined.
If they win the title, Tibbs is taking some credit.
Cole Aldrich is
Tibbs is in a Zaza uniform, no undershirt, just going, yeah.
Kevon Looney shorts.
Oh my God! End it, Tim. End it.
Okay, so we're gonna sign off here on that beautiful laugh. I'm gonna
beautiful Tom cackle.
I'm gonna throw out that the basketball writing community lost Bo Cherney this week, and the Hardwood Paroxysm Group threw out this fundraiser memorial fund for him. It's a company called Lost and Found Youth, and it provides outreach, crisis support services, clothes, food, and safe shelter for homeless and at-risk LGBT youth in Atlanta between ages of 13 and 25. Bo and I wrote together at HP, and he's the guy that talked me into Jeff Teague when I was way out on him when they signed him, and I was really sad to hear about it, and I know David communicated with him a little bit too. So just wanted to throw that out there. It's at live.everydayhero.com. We'll throw it in the podcast article later today. So, on that note, for David Naylor, who's in Iowa, at Prof Cedar, Tom Schreier at TSchreier3, Dane Moore at Dane Moore NBA, I'm Tim Faklis at TIM FAKLIS.
This has been another edition of Wolves Wire, and we'll see you next time.